Morning, I signed the papers on my lake house in Kellerton, Tennessee. I stood on the back deck with a cup of coffee and watched the fog sit low over the water. 63 years old. Retired. No alarm clock. No quarterly reports. No board meetings. Just the sound of geese and the smell of pine. I'd earned this. I hadn't always been comfortable. There were years, a lot of them, when comfortable felt like something other people got to be. I raised my son on a mechanic's salary after his mother passed. We lived in a 2-bedroom rental off Route 9. I packed his lunch every morning, made sure he had clean clothes for school, showed up to every single one of his baseball games even when I'd worked a double shift. I didn't do it for credit. I did it because he was my son, and that's what you do. What I did not do was prepare myself for the man he became after he married her. Her name was Vanessa. She came into my son Conrad's life when he was 31, and within 18 months she had rearranged everything in it, including me. I won't pretend I saw it happening in real time. That's not how it works. It's gradual. A missed Thanksgiving here. A short phone call there. A comment she made at Christmas about how overwhelming it was to spend holidays with extended family. One day I called Conrad on his birthday and he let it go to voicemail. Called back 3 days later like nothing had happened. The last time I saw him before the silence was a Sunday in March. We had lunch at a diner near his house. He seemed distracted, kept checking his phone. When I asked if everything was okay, he said, "Dad, Vanessa and I have been talking, and we just think we need some space to build our own family traditions." He wouldn't look at me when he said it. I remember staring at the laminated menu for a long moment. I ordered the soup. I drove home alone. That was 11 years ago. 11 years. I want you to let that number sit for a second. 11 years of silence from my only son. No birthday calls. No cards. One Christmas card in year 2, with a photo of the two of them in matching sweaters. No note inside, just their printed names. I called. I wrote letters. I showed up once early on, and Vanessa answered the door and told me Conrad wasn't home. His truck was in the driveway. I left. I didn't go back. A man has 2 choices when the people he loves decide he doesn't exist. He can collapse, or he can build. I decided to build. I had spent 30 years as a diesel mechanic, and I knew engines the way some men know scripture. When I retired at 58, I had a small amount saved and a skill nobody could take from me. I started a mobile repair service out of a used truck. Small stuff at first, fleet contracts, farm equipment in the surrounding counties. I was good at it. Word travels fast in rural Tennessee. Within 2 years, I had 3 employees. Within 4, I had a proper shop and a contract with 2 regional trucking companies. I lived carefully, reinvested almost everything, and by the time I turned 62, I had cleared just under $2 million in the business accounts and owned the shop outright. I sold the business to a regional chain for a number I still don't say out loud in polite company. Then I bought the lake house in Kellerton, and I sat on that deck and I drank my coffee, and I finally exhaled. My granddaughter was the one loose thread in all of it. Conrad and Vanessa had a daughter, Abby. She was 14 when I sold the business. I had met her exactly 4 times, twice as a toddler, once at a distance at a school event I wasn't supposed to attend, and once when she was around 10 and somehow found my number and called me herself. We talked for 20 minutes. She asked me if I liked fishing. I told her I loved it. She said she'd never been. Something about that call stayed with me for years. The call that changed everything came on a Wednesday in October. It was my neighbor Vernon who told me first, actually. Vernon is 70, retired postal worker, knows everything that happens within a 10-mile radius before it happens. He called me around 9 in the morning and said, "Oh, you got a white SUV with Georgia plates parked at the end of your road. Been there since 7. I thanked him and didn't think much of it. By noon, I'd forgotten about it. At 2:15, my doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. I set down my book and walked to the front door and looked through the side window before I opened it, habit I'd had for years. Conrad was standing on my porch. He was heavier than I remembered, wearing a collared shirt that was too tight in the shoulders. Vanessa stood one step behind him, arms crossed, looking at the house the way people look at houses they're already calculating square footage on. Next to her, half hidden behind the porch column, was a teenage girl. Abby. Taller than I imagined. Dark eyes. She wasn't looking at the house. She was looking at her shoes. I opened the door. "Dad," Conrad said. He smiled in that practiced way that doesn't reach the eyes. "It's so good to see you." I stood in the doorway, and I did not move. There's a thing that happens in your chest when the person who hurt you the most shows up after a long time. It isn't joy. It isn't anger, exactly. It's more like the air going completely still before a storm. I felt that. I looked at my son, who I had not spoken to in 11 years, and I felt that stillness. "You found the house," I said. "We wanted to surprise you." This was Vanessa. She had a smile on, too, wide and rehearsed. "We've been meaning to reach out for so long. Life just gets so busy, you know how it is." "I know how it is." "Come in," I said, because I didn't know what else to say. "Not yet." They came in. Vanessa walked through my living room the way a real estate agent walks through a listing. I watched her eyes move from the fireplace to the back windows to the kitchen. Conrad was talking. Something about the drive from Atlanta, the traffic on 24, how beautiful the lake was. Abby sat down quietly on the edge of my couch and folded her hands in her lap. I made coffee. It gave me something to do with my hands. They sat at my kitchen table, the three of them, and Conrad began. He was sorry. He knew things had been hard. Vanessa had been going through a lot personally, and they had needed time as a family unit. He hoped I could understand. He said the word healing twice. He said moving forward 3 times. He never once said what specifically he was sorry for. He never said the word wrong. I listened. I nodded. I refilled their cups. Then Vanessa leaned forward and set her hands flat on my table and said, "Earl, we're actually going through a bit of a transitional period right now. We sold the house in Atlanta, and we're in between situations. We were thinking, with all this space you have here, we were hoping we could stay for a while," Conrad finished, "just until we get back on our feet. It wouldn't be long." I looked at my son. Then I looked at Abby. She still hadn't spoken. She was staring at the surface of the table with an expression I recognized, the expression of someone who has been brought somewhere they didn't choose to be and is trying to make themselves as small as possible. "How long is a while?" I asked. 6 months, Vanessa said. "Maybe a year. We'd help with expenses, of course." She said that last part the way people say things they have no intention of doing. I told them I needed to think about it. I told them I had a guest room and Abby could stay there while they figured things out. I told them I needed a few days. They agreed with the enthusiasm of people who had already made the decision for me. What they did not know was that in the 3 days they stayed in my guest rooms, I gave Abby the nice one, the one that faces the water. I made some phone calls. My attorney, a sharp woman named Ms. Beaumont, who had handled the business sale, was the first. Then I called a private investigator I'd used once before for a contract dispute. Then I called Vernon, who, as I mentioned, knows everything. What I found out over those 3 days rearranged my understanding of why my son had shown up on my porch. The house in Atlanta hadn't sold. It had been foreclosed. Conrad had left his corporate sales job 14 months earlier, not voluntarily. There were debts. Credit cards, a personal loan from a private lender, a second mortgage they had taken out in 2021, combined somewhere north of $340,000. The private lender was not the kind of lender you found in the Yellow Pages. And Abby, my granddaughter, who sat quietly at my table and looked at her shoes, had not been in school for 8 months. Vanessa had pulled her out. Abby was 16. She had been told she would start at the school near my house soon. The reason she'd been pulled out, as best as my investigator could piece together, was that Vanessa had been positioning Abby, who was, by every account, a strikingly responsible and capable young woman, to be leveraged. There was a man connected to the private lender. An arrangement had been discussed. I will not describe the details. I don't need to. When I understood what was being planned for my granddaughter, something in me went cold and clear. Not angry. Clear, like the surface of the lake early in the morning before any wind has touched it. On the fourth day, I invited them to dinner. I had called a few people in the weeks before this, friends from the shop, 2 longtime business associates, my neighbor Vernon and his wife, a county sheriff's deputy named Al, who I had known for 15 years. I told each of them I was having a small gathering and that they might see something unexpected, and I asked them to stay calm and trust me. My attorney joined us by phone, available to be put on speaker at a specific moment. I cooked brisket. I made cornbread. I set the table properly with the good dishes, and I put on a Merle Haggard record low in the background. And everything looked warm and ordinary. Vanessa came downstairs in a blouse I hadn't seen her wear before. Conrad shook hands with my guests. Abby helped me carry the bread basket to the table without being asked. We ate. Conrad talked about his plans. He mentioned possibly starting a business, something vague involving real estate consulting. Vanessa mentioned the schools nearby. She said Abby was so excited to start fresh somewhere peaceful. Abby ate her brisket and did not say she was excited about anything. I waited until the plates were cleared. Then I set my napkin on the table and I said, I want to talk about why you're really here. The table went quiet. Conrad started to say something and I raised one hand and he stopped. I told them, calmly, what I knew. The foreclosure, the debts, the lender, the arrangement that had been discussed involving my granddaughter. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't use dramatic language. I went through it the way I used to go through a diagnostic on an engine, methodically, piece by piece, until the complete picture was sitting on the table in front of everyone. Vanessa's face went through several colors. Conrad looked at his plate. I put my attorney on speaker and she confirmed, for the table, that she had already filed the relevant documentation with the county. That a protective order for Abby, citing the specific details of the arrangement, had been approved that afternoon. That Abby's legal guardianship had been temporarily transferred to me pending a full hearing, based on the evidence compiled over the previous week. The deputy, Al, stood up from his chair at that point. He was not there to arrest anyone that night, but his presence and his badge and the fact that he stood up and made clear he was aware of the full situation, that was enough. Vanessa stood up from the table. She said several things I won't repeat. Conrad sat very still. I looked at him across the table. My son, 60 pounds heavier, wearing a collar too tight, in the house of the father he had erased, and I felt something I didn't expect. Not satisfaction. Not anger. Just grief. Deep, quiet grief for the person he could have been if he had chosen differently at several key moments. You can stay tonight, I told them. Tomorrow morning, you leave. Abby stays. You can't just, Vanessa started. The paperwork says I can, I said. Ms. Beaumont will send you copies in the morning. They left the next day at 9:45. Conrad paused at the door and turned around and looked at me for a long moment. I thought he might say something real. He didn't. He walked to the SUV and they drove away and I stood on the porch and watched until the white car disappeared around the bend in the road. Abby was sitting on the back deck when I came inside. She had her knees pulled up to her chest and she was watching the water. I sat down in the other chair and didn't say anything for a while. Did you know, I asked eventually, about the arrangement, about the lender? She was quiet. Then she said, I knew something was wrong. I didn't know all of it. She paused. I called you when I was 10 because I found your number in an old box of Mom's stuff. There was a birthday card you had sent when I was born that she never mailed back. She kept her eyes on the water. I just wanted to know if you were real. I didn't trust myself to speak for a moment. I'm real, I said. She nodded slowly. I know. We sat there a while longer. The geese were back out on the water. The fog had burned off and everything was clean and clear in the October light. In the months that followed, I enrolled Abby in the regional high school in Kellerton. She tested into 11th grade. Her English teacher called me in December to tell me she was one of the best writers in the class. She learned to fish that spring. Not because I pushed it, but because she asked. She started helping Vernon's wife with her garden on weekends, and they became close in the way that older women and young girls sometimes do, passing things quietly between generations. The legal hearing went the way Miss Beaumont said it would. The arrangement involving my granddaughter was documented. The lender was investigated. Conrad and Vanessa's parental rights were not terminated. That was not the outcome I sought, but primary custody remained with me, and a structured contact schedule was established under court supervision. My son did eventually call. About 6 months later, it was a short call. He said he was getting help. He said he was sorry, and this time he said it for something specific. He named the Sunday at the diner, all those years ago, and he said he had thought about it many times. I told him I heard him. I told him the line was open when he was ready to have a real conversation, and that whenever he wanted to meet his daughter again under proper circumstances, I would not stand in the way of that. I meant it. I'm not a man who holds doors closed forever. But I'm also not a man who opens them before the work is done. Abby graduated the following June. She walked across the stage in a gymnasium full of families she had only known for 2 years, and half of them clapped for her like she was their own. Vernon hollered from the back row. Her English teacher was in the 3rd row and stood up. I sat in the 2nd row, and I did not holler, and I did not stand up because I was busy trying to see clearly through something that had gotten in my eyes. She's at the University of Tennessee now on a partial academic scholarship. She calls me on Sundays. She asked me once, not long ago, if I ever regretted not finding her sooner. I told her I looked for ways to reach her for years, that the doors had been closed on my end, that I had thought about her more than she knew. I know, she said. You're the kind of person who shows up. I sat on the deck after that call for a long time, watching the water go still as the sun dropped behind the tree line. 63 years old when I moved to this house. 65 now. The fog still sits low on the water in the mornings. The geese are still there. The coffee is still good. I earned this. And now, for the first time in a long time, I'm not the only one sitting on this deck. I think about the look on Conrad's face when I laid everything on that table. Not the anger in Vanessa's expression, not the sound of her chair scraping back, his face. My son. He sat very still and he looked at his plate and he didn't say a word, and in that silence I understood something I hadn't fully let myself understand before. The people who hurt us the most are rarely strangers. They're the ones we open the door for. Sometimes more than once. There's a version of this story where I open that door in Kellerton, and I let them in because he's my son, and I still love him, and love is supposed to mean something. I know that version. I lived close to it for years, carrying the phone around hoping it would ring, writing letters I wasn't sure anyone read. That kind of waiting takes something out of you slowly, the way a slow leak takes the air out of a tire. You don't notice it until you're sitting flat on the road wondering when it happened. What I learned, eventually, is that decency has to have a spine in it. It isn't enough to mean well. It isn't enough to keep the door unlocked and your heart open and your hands clean. The world doesn't reward that on its own. What it rewards, what actually protects the people you love, is the willingness to do the hard, clear-eyed work of understanding what's really happening around you and acting on it, even when acting on it is painful. I could have let Conrad's visit play out. I could have given them the rooms and told myself it was forgiveness. But Abby would have paid the price for my sentimentality. A 16-year-old girl who called me from a stranger's phone at age 10 because she wanted to know if I was real. She would have paid for my need to believe the best. So I made calls instead. I looked at the facts instead of the feelings. I asked hard questions and I listened to the answers even when they were ugly. That's not revenge. That's just being awake. I built the business the same way. 30 years turning wrenches taught me that an engine doesn't care how you feel about it. It runs or it doesn't. You find the problem, you fix the problem. You don't let wishful thinking substitute for diagnosis. I carried that same discipline into everything else, including that October dinner. Including the paperwork Miss Beaumont had ready before they sat down at my table. And Abby. I watch her now and I see something in her that wasn't damaged by any of it. Something that held. She kept her own sense of right and wrong through years of circumstances that would have bent a lot of people. She asked questions. She paid attention. She helped carry the breadbasket to the table in a house full of strangers without being asked. That kind of character doesn't come from comfort. It comes from having to rely on your own judgment when the adults around you couldn't be trusted. She built something in herself out that quietly, and it shows. What I know now, at 65, sitting on a deck I earned, the life you build when no one is watching is the only one that's really yours. Conrad and Vanessa showed up because they saw the lake house, the space, the number on the business sale. They saw the outcome. They miss every single morning I got up before dawn and made it happen. They miss the years. You can't skip the years and collect what they produce. That's not how any of this works. The lake is still there in the mornings. The fog still comes. Abby calls on Sundays. I have everything I need.